there's infrastructure on these sites. At Saqqara, at Abu Sir, at Dashur, at Giza, we have evidence for very complex systems of what I can only call channeled blocks, these U-shaped blocks that are below the floor level. So you have these floor tiles that might be a couple feet thick. In some cases, they're even cased on top of that. But right down beneath that stuff, you have this infrastructure of essentially piping. It runs all under these sites. It's all over the place at Abu Sir. We see evidence for it, Giza, Saqqara, like all these old kingdom sites. It's not something you ever see on the later sites. These are what the oldest of sites have these very strange and complex, essentially either it could have been housing piping, it could have been housing cables, it could have been, we don't know, but and sometimes it's not all gravity fed, like sometimes they'll run all the way down beneath causeways to where there would have been water, and then it runs all over the site in complex patterns. At Abu Sir, it's probably the best example. There's Y joins and all these other things running beneath the floor, and sometimes using fairly exotic stone types like granite or white calcite or alabaster. And a lot of those stones show evidence for machining. There's a great example at Saqqara of machined alabaster U-shaped channeled blocks that are beneath the floor tiles. And it's a real mystery. We don't know why. I mean, it's like if you ask the explanation for what this white calcite or alabaster was used, it was prized for its white color. It's an expensive stone to try and use. It's difficult to obtain. Alabaster and calcite comes from, extinct and calcified natural springs. Like these are millions of years ago were natural springs. They've calcified over time. And to get white calcite, you actually have to dig all the way to the source of the natural spring. So it's wherever that was, it's not like an easy stone to get to. Further out from the source, you get sort of yellow calcite and brown calcite, but they were using white calcite. And, Egyptologists say that they prize that stuff for its color, for its clean color, or sometimes it can be transparent. In that case, what is this stuff doing buried beneath the floor level where it's never going to be seen? Like it's literally a stone type that gets used in this underground infrastructure that's never seen. So they must have been using it for some other purpose. Like I think some of these stone types that you see, particularly in the really megalithic stone sites, might have had a functional purpose, like choosing particular types of stone like basalt, granite, limestone, white calcite, even quartzite in some places, and in particular orders. And there's plenty of other indications that there was something else going on at these sites. I mean, my last video I did on Karnak Temple, there's some really interesting, there's an area of Karnak that it's normally off limits. Again, we know the right people to get in and see it, and I love showing people this stuff every year. There's a part of Karnak where the granite's literally crumbling apart. It's granite diorite. It's something's happened to the stone here where it's like the inside of the stone has swelled, or it's like it's undergone a transformation and it's expanded. And it's almost around the edge of the stone, there's a couple of inches of where the stone is in good condition. But because the inside's like transformed and expanded, it's put this pressure on the outside, and it's cracked all of the outside. And in some places it's like falling apart, like it's cracked whole blocks apart, and then the inside of the blocks just crumbling
from the inside out.
Yeah, inside out. And
so wild.
And then we see that also at Abu Sir and other places where you have like crumbling basalt. And this happens in nature, right? But it takes literally millions of years of exposure. Basalt and these other igneous stones that are formed in the heat of like lava and formed over millions of years of compression and heat in the earth. I mean, you can expose them to millions of years of sunlight, and okay, they're going to erode and degrade over time, but we're talking about cut surfaces of stone that are doing that. And they're originally finished. And so at Abu Sir, for example, you have basalt that's been cut, and then it was cased in limestone. So it's like, it was surrounded by limestone, but those mating surfaces are now crumbling and falling apart. Now, who knows? It's pure speculation, but was it heat cycling? Was there something going through it? I mean, I do have a video where we were playing with like a very high voltage electromagnetic sort of field generator device, and we were testing different types of stone, and they have different electromagnetic properties. Like granite doesn't do anything. You can get arcs coming off limestone, and then somewhat of an arc coming off basalt. So they do have different properties under different conditions. And, is it possible that those were some of these properties of the stone were things that were being chased by the builders for a functional purpose?
Right.
I love these ideas. And I know Chris Dunn is exploring some of those in some of his theories and his work. He certainly knows a lot more about it than I do. Again, I'm trying to illustrate that there may be reasons for that type of stone, and some of those properties might have something to do with a possible purpose. So it's like, why would we not research that further? Why would we not apply ourselves and try and see, is there anything here that could possibly provide an answer or provide a clue for why this was done this way? Yeah.
I also want to talk about Yusuf.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, we'll get into that. That guy seems super interesting. In
For
fact,
sure.
they let him like run around there and guide people and tour and explain all this stuff that goes counter to the narrative.
Yeah, Yusuf's great. I mean, I love Yusuf in just the fact that he has he's such a knowledgeable guy. And Yusuf's dad was Hakim El Ayawan. He's a really famous indigenous wisdom keeper and guide. He's unfortunately wested since then, or he's passed. He was the guide that was used by guys like Graham Hancock, Robert Bauval, John Anthony West. Hakim's well known. There's lectures you can find from him online.
What are some of the theories of that guy came up with?
Hakim?
Yeah.
Hakim has, one of the things I can talk about, he thinks there was acoustical properties to a lot of these sites, that there were, some of these were sound hospitals. In fact, he even ran one for quite a while. And they had, look, anecdotally at least, very good results. They would take people to these ancient places into some specific areas that have, resonant properties, and they would, I don't know exactly what they were doing in there, but they had people that recovered from illnesses. And at least anecdotally from what I've heard, it worked. And then as the story goes, as it's been told to me, Zahiwas actually shut them down. He stopped them from doing it.
Who is Zahiwas again?
Well, Zahiwas was the long-term head of the Supreme Council of Antiquities, or the Department of Antiquities and Tourism, I think it's called now.
Okay.
He's, notorious kind of figure he had that debate with Graham Hancock where he kind of lost the cool. He's probably the world's most famous Egyptologist, certainly Egyptian Egyptologist, world famous guy. Written a bunch of books. I talked about him a few times. I've met him a few times. In fact, with the last trip to Egypt, we ran into him like 4 times.
Really?
Unreal. Yeah. He was just there. He was at.
Is he a nice guy?
He can be a charming guy. I suspect he probably, look, I don't know him personally. I know he's treated a lot of people very fairly. He's probably been less fair to others. I had no problem with him. I was just on a tour, and this was the Graham Hancock tour where he was supposedly debating him, and we spent a day with him. And I think he's certainly had a history of being quite, in the past, it's strange, he really attacks a few of the alternative authors, Graham. In particular, Robert Bauval, he doesn't like. He's pretty fond of saying that, people are just charlatans trying to make money and they're all pyramidiates and stuff like this. But back in the day, though, he was quite friendly. And in fact, I've seen a picture of like Zahi and John Anthony West and Robert Bauval and Graham Hancock kind of arm in arm at the Sphinx enclosure. And he certainly has enabled some interesting research to happen privately a few times. I had a video about the Sphinx temple that started to get into some of that with, there's an interesting correlation and at least these allegations of connection between him and the Edgar Cayce Foundation. Do you know who Edgar Cayce is? The American prophet. Okay, so this is an interesting story. So Cayce was a prophet, and a lot of people made a lot of money based on his predictions for the stock market back in the day, and he ended up he had these visions and wrote a couple books, and one of his visions entailed you've probably heard of the Hall of Records, right?
Yes.
This idea. Okay, so a lot of that comes from Cayce. He talks about the fact that there's a Hall of Records in one of the locations. There's 3 of them, I think, and one of them is under the paw of the Sphinx, and then there's another one that's supposedly under. I think it was I mentioned it earlier. It's Mount Nemrut, like the Nemrut tumulus pile, which is an insane site that I also saw for the first time this year. But so he's that foundation, it's the ARE, I think it's the Association for Research and Enlightenment, is essentially the Casey Foundation.
Okay.
And they've kind of been involved in private expeditions to Giza. They've been looking, right? They're trying to satisfy Casey's prediction about the Hall of Records. And they have been essentially digging and looking around at Giza and these other places since like the 1970s. Now, Zahi's very much against the anything Atlantis related. He's like, there's no ancient civilization. So in publicly facing, right? He decries any of that type of thing. But he did also grant like the Casey Foundation like a 5-year permit to do unlimited, essentially digging and excavation on the Giza Plateau, including in the Great Pyramid. And so it's on one hand you sort of decrying all of this anything lost civilization, and then on the other hand, you're enabling essentially an organization whose stated goal is to prove out Atlantis and that there was a Hall of Records and everything like that. Not only that, but Edgar Casey's son, Hugh Lynn Casey, he wrote a book, and in that book he claims, and I will say that Zahi Hawass has denied this, he claims that the Edgar Casey Foundation funded his education. Like they paid for his education at Pennsylvania University. They found, like he literally says in the book, and this isn't me saying it, he found that they found Zahi, who was a site inspector at the time, like not, like lower ranked kind of guy, but he was pliable and agreeable, and they thought he was someone they could work with, so they funded his education along with Mark Lehner, who's been a long-term partner of Zahi Hawass, and that went through the Pennsylvania University. They got him his doctorate. And for sure, it's verified, like Zahi has had engagements with the ARE plenty of times. He's gone and spoken at their events. He's been part of it. He goes back there and lectures quite often. So, it's just strange to me that he's associated with an organization like the ARE, which has done these secretive digs. And there's strong evidence, as documented by Robert Boval, which might be one of the reasons that Zahi doesn't like him so much. He's documented the fact that Zahi's been enabling kind of secret expeditions, digging and drilling around the Sphinx since the 1970s. Like there's kind of one acknowledged drilling effort that they made to look under the Sphinx. I think it happened in the mid-90s, thereabouts, and they were drilling under the body of the Sphinx. And the stated goal was, we're checking the integrity of the limestone bedrock given the water table's rising, blah, blah, blah. But there's plenty of evidence for a bunch of other drilling that's happened, like as far back as the late 1970s. And there's pictures of, Hugh Lynn Casey and Mark Lehner and Zahi Hawass from those times, like a young Zahi. They're all together. And then in the mid to late 90s, he enabled something called the Shore Expedition, which was Dr. Joseph Shore, a couple other people, Boris Said was one of them, but they're all ARE members. They're all part of the Casey Foundation, and none of them are Egyptologists or archaeologists, but he gave them a 5-year permit, open permit, to do whatever they wanted up at the Giza Plateau. And they did a bunch of stuff. They did a bunch of excavations around the Sphinx, and Zahi was involved in it, and they even made a documentary that's never been seen. So Boris Said, who was a filmmaker, he's also since died. And I dug into like these old Art Bell radio episodes from the 90s where he was talking about it. He had a falling out with I think Joseph Shaw, the guy that was funding the experiment or the expedition. And just based on this fallout, the documentary kind of went into limbo and it's never been seen, but apparently it's part of it, and they had gone in under the Sphinx and looked at chambers. And Zahi at the time, and Boris said they found chambers beneath the Sphinx. Like they 100% found chambers beneath the Sphinx. By the way, also a claim made by John Anthony West and Dr. Robert Schoch when they analysed the area with ground penetrating radar. They found chambers beneath the Sphinx. And at the time when they were doing this experiment, Zahi said, we've got this incredible announcement and discovery. It's going to shake up the world's history. We're going to change what we know about the sort of the structure of the Giza Plateau and what's down below the ground. He was teasing it. And then this documentary kind of went away, and he's never said anything about it since. And in fact, to this day, denies that there's any chambers or any structures or things beneath the Sphinx. If asked, he'll say, well, they found natural fissures in the rock, and there's nothing else, which is nonsense. I mean, Boris Said's on record of saying, no, I've seen them. Like he's been down there and seen them and
been in them.
Well, it's kind of what he says, yeah, and but it's very secret. It's all private privately organized and permitted by Zahi Hawass. And so there's an interesting history. I think if there are chambers down there, and if there's anything in them, or there was, it's long gone. Like I think it's been pilfered, or it's been taken, or it's not public. I mean, there's also a chance that if there was ever anything in there, the Egyptians or the dynastic Egyptians might have taken it. There's a couple of people with theories along those lines, like Manu Seyfezada wrote a book, I think, called Beneath the Sphinx that talks about the idea that the Hall of Records may well have been there, but it was discovered by the Old Kingdom Egyptians who took it, and then there's some evidence that they were replicating some of that information and knowledge through a particular cult that persisted through dynastic Egypt. And it's an interesting story that he puts together. It is new data, but it seems likely that they're indicating some really interesting information, like the spacing of planets, the relative distance of planets in the solar system, like all this cosmic information that it seems like they didn't really know what to do with, but it was information that they'd gotten from, this trove of data from a lost ancient civilization. And it's just they then were replicating it and kind of recording it down in their own way. And there's all these interpretations of this stuff that seems to match all of what we know about the solar system and the structure of it. So it kind of goes, there's all these different directions that stuff goes in. And I've been meaning to do a more dedicated sort of deep dive into that shore expedition and the history of secret digs around the Sphinx, because, the Sphinx and the Sphinx Temple, it is like it's described as a gateway. Like there is a lot of legitimate reasons to think that there's something below that structure in that part of the Giza Plateau. Like even the way it's historically depicted and talked about from ancient Egypt, like they often, when they draw out the Sphinx, I mean, they show it on a pedestal. Like the Sphinx is always depicted in these steles as, most of the time, on top of a pedestal. And in many of those pedestals, there's a doorway. And then the Sphinx is often described as a doorway or as a guardian, guarding a doorway and into the underworld or something like this. And when you look at the Sphinx, it's obviously sitting on the bedrock, right? But you have to imagine there's a structure in front of it that's next to the Valley Temple's on like the left looking at the Sphinx. Then there's the Sphinx Temple in front of the Sphinx, and the Sphinx is behind it. Now, the Sphinx Temple has been shut for public access for I don't know how long. Like Yusuf, I mean, he's in his 40s. He's never been in there until we got to go in there on one trip. We were probably one of the first groups to ever, and thanks again to the people I know in Egypt who arranged this through the Ministry of Antiquities to finally open up access to the Sphinx Temple as a special permission. And we went in there. Very interesting structure. Amazing. There's amazing granite cornice blocks and all this stuff. But if you would imagine it back in the day with its cornice blocks, which are these curved blocks that would have been around the edge of it, and you'd looked at it from down in the valley towards the Sphinx, it would have looked as if the Sphinx was sitting on top of the temple, which makes the Sphinx Temple potentially the location for the pedestal of the Sphinx, which has the doorway to the underworld. Now, in the Sphinx Temple, when you go in there is indeed evidence for shafts that go down. There's these giant, there's like an 80-ton channeled granite block in the ground beneath the floor tiles that have since been removed that terminates at a shaft that goes down to we don't know where that hasn't been cleared. But it obviously goes underground. And I mean, not only that, but out the front of the Sphinx Temple, if you walk back, if you're standing there at Giza and you're looking at it, it's where the seats are for the sound and light show. Sort of off in the corner, about 30 or 40 feet in front of the Sphinx Temple, there's a little concrete pad, and there's a metal tube sticking out of it like this, just off the ground, just sort of unobtrusively in the corner. That's where Zahi Hawass himself did a drilling experiment. So they drilled down like 150 feet. This is a limestone plateau. And at like 150 feet or 130, something like that, they hit granite. This drill hit granite and returned these shards and flakes of red granite from 130 feet below the ground.
What the fuck?
And there's not natural granite there. So what the hell is down there that deep, and it's made of granite? Right?
Whoa.
I mean, it goes on and on. Like you go halfway up the causeway, like connects the Sphinx and the Valley Temple to the Middle Pyramid complex. Right? It's this big causeway. It goes up to the pyramid. Halfway up it is what's known as the Osiris shaft. Mm-hmm. Now, this is 3 different levels that you can go into. Again, as a special permission. There's water at the bottom. but there's 3 chambers that go down to about 150 feet, and there's big granite boxes in them as you go down there. Right? And there's tunnels that literally lead off down the causeway that have never been explored at the bottom level. They're caved in and stuff, but they've never been explored. There's footage of when they did pump the water out back in the day when they were exploring it, and it was like a Fox, I think it was on the Fox channel, and Zahi was down there with a reporter and saying, oh, this was the tomb of Osiris or whatever, and she's like, well, what about these tunnels? Zahi's like, no, we've never explored them. We sent a boy in and he couldn't get very far, but we've never looked at as to where they go. So, like, there's definitely underground chambers and infrastructure down there, and we honestly don't know if they've been explored and if, there's anything in there or if, what's happened, which is...
What do you think his motivation would be to change his story on that and keep all this secret excavation secret and all this secret exploration and not to change the narrative? Like, what sort of motivations would he have?
I don't know. I mean, if I think it's the typical. If there's any motivation, it's pure speculation. I'm not claiming this, or that I know it. And I'll just probably reiterate that Zahi's denied that he has any connection to the ARE. For sure, he was involved in these expeditions. I mean, there's plenty of people who talked about him being involved in these expeditions. Mm-hmm. And again, all of this happened 30 years ago now. But yeah, I mean, what motivates people, right? It's money and it's power and it's all these sort of things. I don't know. I don't know. And it's I don't like any real conspiratorial angle on these things in terms of, they find stuff and is it hidden from us because it doesn't conform to the story? I don't know. I'd like to think not. I'd like to think that if they found stuff, they'd talk about it regardless of if it had a significant impact on the story of history. But
well, doesn't he make money quite literally from people visiting Egypt and exploring?
Well, yeah, I mean, he's
like from tourism?
Made plenty of money. I mean, I don't know how directly. He's a very powerful figure in Egypt. I'd say this. He's also done a lot for Egyptology. I mean, he champions the returning of objects to Egypt, which I think is a great cause, particularly if they're in private hands and people can't see them. The stuff that gets, Egypt's been pilfered by everybody for so long.
Yeah, you were saying much of this stuff's been found in Israel, right?
Oh, it's all over the place. Yeah, all over the place. There is stuff that you don't have to go back to just Israel, but you go back to the Americans, the French, the English. I mean, during all the periods of occupation of the last several hundred years, everyone who's been involved in the governance of Egypt. I mean, I think Matt Simpson just did a video, Luke Cavans actually did a video talking about how the British Museum is essentially full of artifacts that were stolen from Egypt. I mean, one of the sticking points is that the original Rosetta Stone is in the British Museum. It's been there for like 200 years. But it's, I'm like, if it's in a museum somewhere and people can see it, they have, people don't understand the scope of artifacts that have been found here too. There are warehouses absolutely full of this stuff in Egypt. Like some of the tombs in the Valley of the Kings are like they fill them up with all the artifacts they find in other places and lock the doors because it's essentially climate controlled. And I hope, and I've yet to see it, but they're building a giant new museum, or it should be just about done by now, the Grand Egyptian Museum. Biggest museum in the world from what I understand it's going to be. And I really hope that they have enough space and real estate to show us all of the artifacts they just haven't had the space to show. I mean, there's so much stuff in Egypt and that's been taken from Egypt. And even then, even despite all of this, even the Egyptologists, and Zahi will say this as well, is that it's like 70% of it is still underneath the sands. Mm-hmm. Like he thinks that we've only maybe uncovered 20 to 30% of what's out there. So there's a lot going on, and but yeah, look, I don't know. It's an interesting sort of story to dive into with the history of some of these excavations, and like I said, it kind of goes back to my point about the pyramid earlier, where I hope that whatever they do and I'm sure somebody's planning it, that they're going to go and try and look for this chamber. I would very much hope that it gets shared with the world. That's all I want. It's like share that information, let everybody see it. I mean, it's part of everybody's history. I don't care who makes money on it or doesn't, but it's just like, I think a lot of people would be interested.